Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. For today's session, I have chosen the international edition of the Hindu as there were many important and interesting articles. I have chosen a total of 7 articles, 3 articles which are important for the mains exam and 4 small articles that are relevant for the prelims exam. So let's cover these topics one by one and ensure that it's a comprehensive discussion so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us by pressing the like button, do share your comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So before we start, we have few important announcements. Yesterday, we hosted a mega UPSC event, Unacademy Manzil 2024. I'm sure many of you would have watched the session live. If you haven't yet, the video is available on the homepage of our YouTube channel. So during this event, there was a big reveal for 2025 aspirants. Unacademy has decided to provide affordable IAS courses at just the price of $24,999 on all our IAS programs. So we have upcoming batches starting from 7th of May. And if you wish to enroll, do contact the number that has been provided. And also don't forget, as part of the Conquer Prelims crash course, which has already started on the Unacademy app, today Shyam sir will be taking up the 5th session for Indian economy, where he will be discussing the most important static topics for your upcoming prelims. I hope you know that the Conquer Prelims crash course is divided into 2 phases. In phase 1, we are covering the most important static topics. So these sessions are available only on the Unacademy app. And the session goes live at 6 p.m. from 6 to 7 p.m. where we discuss the most important static topics through MCQ-based questions. Very soon, the second phase of Conquer Prelims is going to start, where we will focus on the important current affairs of last 1.5 years. This will begin from 1st May, right here on our YouTube channel. From 1st May, starting at 7:30 p.m. till 9 p.m. So every day throughout the month of May till 31st of May, we will be discussing the important current affairs in these sessions, again through MCQ-based questions. So do subscribe to our channel and ensure that you attend all these sessions so that you are thoroughly prepared for the upcoming prelims exam. Also, you can join the Telegram channel. You can scan the QR code, search for Unacademy IAS English, because the session link for the static part of the crash course will be shared in the evening so that you can just click on the link and directly access these classes which are taking place. So with this, let's begin with the analysis for today. Let's look at this article from page number 1. On the front page of the international edition, we have this article that refers to the emerging trends in India's trade relations with China. It's a very important topic, not just for international relations. It's important even for GS paper 3 under economy. This article is bringing out certain trends and patterns in the trade relations between India and China. So let's look at the key findings of a report which is based on India-China trade relations, and then examine the issues related to India-China trade relations. When you look at India's trade equation with China, it's one of the largest trading relationship, but we do have many problems and challenges. So it's important to understand this topic comprehensively, both for your prelims and your mains. So we will dive deep into this topic and understand all the important aspects of India-China trade relationship. But first, let's look at what the article is telling us. This article is based on a recent report that was brought out by Global Trade Research Initiative. It's a research organization which has brought out this report on India-China trade relations. According to this report, India's imports from China for 23-24 has crossed the $101 billion mark. Essentially, in the last financial year, India has imported goods and commodities worth more than $101 billion from China. Now, this is a very massive number. If you look at the overall bilateral trading volume between India and China, it's roughly between 120 to 130 billion dollars. If you account for the exports of both the countries, the total trading volume is somewhere between 120 to 130 billion dollars. Now, out of that, if India alone is importing nearly 90 to 100 billion dollars worth of merchandise and commodities, it essentially tells us that we are exporting hardly 15 to 20 billion dollars worth of goods to China. So essentially, there is a massive trade deficit in this trade relationship. It has become a one-sided trading relationship. India is importing heavily from China and our dependency is increasing year by year. We are importing almost 90 to 100 billion dollars worth of goods and merchandise. According to the report, the last financial year's imports from China has crossed the $101 billion mark. Whereas if you look at India's exports to China, it has largely stagnated in the range of 15 to 20 billion dollars. So almost every year, there is a trade deficit of 90 to 100 or even more than $100 billion. For example, a couple of years ago in 2022, our trade deficit with China crossed the $100 billion mark. So this is not a sustainable trade relationship, and this could affect the larger relations between India and China as well. There are some serious concerns, not just for the Indian economy, but also for India's security interests as a result of this unfavorable trading relationship. So let's understand more details about this important relationship. Because according to this report, our imports from China is going to increase even further in the coming years. Experts are predicting that India has such a critical dependency on certain Chinese products that our imports will only continue to rise in the coming years. And that is the reason why the topic becomes very important and it's something worth examining. Now, if you look at the total merchandise imports of India, right, it's somewhere around $600+ billion. All right, you don't have to remember and by heart these exact numbers. Just knowing the rough approximate figures is more than enough. So if you look at India's total merchandise imports, it's somewhere around $677 billion. Out of that, 15% of it is from China. That is China's share in India's imports. More than $101 billion worth of goods we have procured from China, which is 15% of our total import basket. So now, let us look at some other key metrics and figures and understand why this is an unsustainable trade relationship, why India has some serious concerns about the trade relations that we have with China. Now, please look at this particular graph, which is depicting the trade deficit between the two countries over the last few years. Just look at the numbers here. In 2021, India imported nearly $96 billion worth of goods from China, and in return, we exported just around $20 billion worth of goods. So what's the deficit? The deficit was $70 billion. Then look at 2022. We imported around $126 billion worth of goods and exported just $15 billion. So these numbers are quite alarming for India. The massive trade deficit, which is in China's favor, right? It goes against Indian interests. Any ideal trade relationship should have some kind of balance. There should be a very reasonable trade deficit, or ideally there should be a trade surplus. But in the case of India-China relations, you see that there is a huge difference. The relationship is skewed in favor of China. Now, if you look at data over the years regarding how India has imported from China, our imports have always been in this range. From 2014 all the way till 2022, India has imported between $60 to $90 billion worth of goods at least every single year. So now there are few years where the total imports has started crossing $100 billion. But if you look at the export from India, it has remained stagnant. Exports from India has largely remained stagnant in the range of 15 to 20 billion dollars. Is that clear? So imports have been increasing, right? And it is projected to increase even further, but exports have largely remained stagnant. So this is where experts and analysts are expressing concern about the viability of such a trading relationship. Understood? So this is one very important point that you need to note down. So now, let's examine the broader implications of a widening trade deficit. See, one direct implication is that it will obviously widen our current account deficit. This could have macroeconomic consequences as well. And more importantly, a hostile and aggressive neighbor like China is known to use the economic advantage to create geopolitical leverage. China has often done this with other countries. It uses its economic strength, it uses its economic advantage that it has with other countries and tries to turn that into a geopolitical leverage. Now, given that India-China have a problematic relationship, we have a standing border dispute, we are in strategic competition with each other across the Indo-Pacific, it is very likely that China could leverage the economic advantage it has over India to cripple the Indian economy and thus curb India's influence and restrict India's growth as well. So there could be geopolitical consequences arising out of this, especially when you have a hostile, aggressive relationship filled with issues and tensions, right? And when China has shown such behavior with other countries, it is quite possible that China might use the economic advantage it has to punish India if required. Now, the concern here is that there are certain industries which have developed a critical import dependency on China. If you look at various goods and merchandise that we import from China, there are few sectors, specific sectors that stand out. And these domestic sectors in India, they have a critical dependency on these Chinese products. China supplies manufactured goods, intermediary raw materials and ingredients which go into the manufacturing of various other goods and commodities in the country. So our domestic producers are quite heavily dependent on the intermediary supplies provided by China. There are many sectors where China dominates the Indian market. So this is what creates all the more concern for the Indian government. For example, if you look at, let's say, electronics and telecom industry, almost 43.9% of the components and devices and products that are used in our electronic and telecom sector, it is imported, procured from China. If you look at, let's say, pharmaceuticals, if you look at the pharma industry, India is considered as the pharmacy of the world. We are known to produce one of the largest volumes of generic drugs and vaccines. But most of the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, is procured from China. Indian pharmaceutical companies, they have a critical dependency on China. Nearly 60% of the APIs used in producing drugs in India, it's coming from China. So that is the extent of dependency that we have across different sectors. You see the same in machinery, textile and clothing, automobiles, and many other sectors. You look at power and telecom sector, for example. Most of the telecom switching equipment, which is the backbone of your mobile communication and internet infrastructure, it's largely from China. The equipment, the power equipment, which goes into transformers and power grids, is largely again from China. So there is a critical dependency that has been created. So Indian industry has developed this dependency on China, which may not be good for India in the long run. So this is what worries India, and this remains a major concern for India. Now let me show you what are the primary exports from India to China and what are the primary imports from China to India. If you look at what India is exporting to China, you will actually notice a very disturbing trend. This is another point of concern. If you look at the top exports of India, right, we are exporting largely raw materials. We are largely exporting raw materials to China. For example, fish and seafood, granite, iron ore, petroleum-based raw materials, cotton yarn, etc. These are not finished goods. We are not adding value and then exporting manufactured goods. We are largely exporting raw materials to China. What is China doing? China is leveraging its manufacturing potential. It is making use of the cheap labor available and it is adding value to these raw materials. It is converting them into finished goods and intermediaries and products and exporting them back to India. If you look at what we are procuring from China, it is largely finished goods and also intermediaries. Intermediaries are those products and spare parts and components which are further used in the assembly or development of other goods and products. So China controls these supply chains and we are largely procuring finished goods and intermediaries, which is essentially an unequal trading relationship. There are experts who even compare this with a new form of colonialism. This is exactly what European colonial powers did to their colonies. You take Britain, for example. What did Britain do to colonize India? It looted the raw materials, turned them into finished goods and products, and dumped it back on the Indian market. That is how the Indian economy was destroyed by the colonial powers. So something similar has developed here between India and China, and hence many experts compare this to a new form of colonialism. If you look at the value of our exports and imports, there is a massive difference. If you take the value being added in India, right, and the products that we are exporting to China, and look at the value of what we are procuring from China to India, there is a difference of 1/5 in terms of value. Understood? Essentially, Chinese exports to India are 5 times more valuable than what we are exporting to China. So this difference in value addition, in value creation, gives rise to a concern that is this a new form of colonialism? Has the Indian market been colonized by China? So this has very serious implications for the Indian economy. And as I told you, this could have geopolitical implications. So apart from this, there are many other concerns that we have with this trading relationship. One major concern is about market access. Indian companies don't get equal market access, whereas China has dominated the Indian market. For example, in India's core areas where we have considerable strength, like information technology, pharmaceuticals, textiles, even gems and jewelry. These are some strength sectors of India where Indian companies are global leaders. But these sectors, they are not getting adequate market access into China. China has created trade barriers. It has created restrictions for the entry of Indian companies and Indian products. But on the other hand, China has a lot of access into the Indian market, and China has even resorted to unfair trade practices like dumping. China is often violating the WTO norms of trade. It provides unfair subsidies to its farmers and manufacturers and producers. It mass produces on scale and dumps the goods on other markets. So the practice of dumping of goods is prohibited under WTO. Countries can impose anti-dumping duties against it to protect the domestic industry. So dumping is a unfair trade practice. It occurs when an imported product can be sold in our market at a cheaper rate than the manufacturing cost of that product in our local market. In that case, our local domestic producers can never compete with the cheaper imports. It will wipe out domestic industry. They can never compete with these cheap imports coming in. So these are some standing concerns. The limited market access available to our companies and products, the unfair trade practices of China, questionable subsidies that it provides, practices like dumping of goods on the Indian market. So these are unaddressed issues which continue to affect the India-China trade relations. Then upon that, there are some serious security concerns about Chinese products as well, especially in the electronics and communication sector. The products that we procure from Chinese companies, it has raised serious security concerns. For example, if you look at Chinese companies like Huawei or ZTE Telecom, these are major players in the mobile infrastructure market. Around the world, most of your 2G, 3G, 4G communication systems, they are built on the backbone created by these Chinese companies. They have created the back end of the infrastructure. So in many countries, not just in India, even in Western countries, there are serious security concerns that these Chinese companies might have been forced to create security backdoors on the equipment to help the Chinese security and intelligence agencies to hack into the networks. Because as you know, China is an authoritarian state, right? And there are many Chinese companies that have global dominance, which are very close to China's security establishment and intelligence establishment. For example, Huawei, which is a global telecom giant, has very close links with Chinese PLA and the Ministry of State Security. So there are concerns around the world, even in US and European countries, that these Chinese companies might be working at the behest of the Chinese security establishment. What if they are creating backdoors in the mobile back-end infrastructure equipment or in the power equipment that is being installed? All this is part of critical infrastructure of a country. This could enable Chinese cyber groups and intelligence agencies to easily hack into those networks and launch cyber espionage campaigns or launch a cyber war campaign. So there are some serious security concerns as well regarding the products that we procure from Chinese companies. So these are the major issues that underline our trade relationship. And we even disagree over the trade data as well. This is my last point. There is discrepancy in the trade numbers presented by India and presented by China. If you look at Ministry of Commerce from India and its data, right, according to the government of India, the trade numbers are slightly lower, but China appears to inflate the numbers. So there is a mismatch in the official trade data regarding how much we are importing and exporting from each other. So all these issues, they continue to persist and affect our trade relationship, and this has very serious economic and as well as security and geopolitical implications. So you can expect a full-fledged mains question where UPSC might ask you to analyze all the issues related to India-China trade relations and what solutions can you think of. Now you tell me what could be a way forward. I will not tell you this right now. Please mention possible solutions. For example, how can India reduce the dependency that we have, the import dependency that we have on China? How can we deal with the security concerns? How can we deal with issues related to market access and unfair trade practices? How can we reduce the trade deficit? These are the 5 points you need to address. So please provide the way forward, provide your suggestions, your ideas in the comment section below. Now let's look at the next article from the same page, the front page. There's an article related to the National Human Rights Commission, NHRC, and its accreditation status. This is another important topic, both for prelims and mains. So let's understand what is NHRC, what is its role and composition, and what is the concern related to its accreditation status. See, according to the report, NHRC is struggling at Geneva to retain its A-star rating as far as global accreditation is concerned. See, National Human Rights Commission, it's a statutory body in India established through a law to protect and promote human rights in the country. It has been established as part of an international obligation. All right? So, for NHRC to have global accreditation, for it to be recognized by other global powers, and for India to take part in human rights proceedings and to vote on human rights issues at UNHRC in Geneva or other UN bodies in New York, then our NHRC should have a A-star rating or A status. So human rights commissions from around the world, they are accredited. They are given a status, they are given a rating by a global committee. If you don't have A status, you cannot vote. You cannot vote on human rights issues and debates at the UN Human Rights Council, the UNHRC, which is headquartered in Geneva. You can't vote at several UNGA related bodies as well. Various other organs of the UN, specialized agencies of the UN that function under UNGA. You can't vote on human rights related issues if your National Human Rights Commission does not have the A status or the A-star rating. Is that clear? So now the question is, who provides this status? Who provides this accreditation? And what's the process? What's the criteria that should be met? And what's the problem with India's NHRC? These are the three major questions that you need to find answers for. See, in 2023, NHRC's A status rating was put on hold, and questions have been raised about the composition of India's NHRC, especially with regard to the presence of police personnel and retired government officials, because that creates a conflict of interest. If there is a national body, a statutory body looking to protect and promote human rights, usually human rights allegations come up against the government itself, against security forces. So if you are including former police officers, IAS officers who have been part of the government as NHRC members, that is a direct conflict of interest. It affects the composition of NHRC, it does not meet the global standards. Next, any such human rights commission should have a diverse representation, right? On the basis of gender, on the basis of minorities. So all these groups, they should be adequately represented to ensure that NHRC is truly inclusive and diverse and represents the society of that particular country. But in the case of India's NHRC, there has been a lack of gender diversity, there has been a lack of minority representation. So essentially, our NHRC's composition has not matched the global standards, and hence last year, our A status rating was put on hold. There is a possibility India's NHRC might lose the status. We might be given the B status, B star rating, which means India cannot vote at UNHRC and we can't vote at debates on human rights issues at other UNGA related bodies as well. So let me give you some important points and facts about NHRC first, which can help you in your prelims, and then we'll discuss the topic further. The National Human Rights Commission, as I told you, it's a statutory body. And it is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to be fully autonomous, independent from the government. Essentially, there should be no government interference. That is when truly human rights can be protected. Because human rights allegations are primarily brought up against the state, against the government, against the security and police forces. So if human rights have to be protected and promoted, any such human rights commission should be independent, autonomous of the government, and there should be no government interference of any kind. This is a basic ground rule. Now, India has been a signatory to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights since late 1940s. Right? We are party to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. We have also signed and ratified the Paris Principles of 1991 that deals with protection and promotion of human rights. So to fulfill these global obligations, these international commitments, India passed the Protection of Human Rights Act in the year 1993. This allowed India to fulfill its international commitment under Paris Principles and Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And it was under this law that NHRC was established as an independent human rights commission. There is an equivalent commission at the state level called the State Human Rights Commission. So these institutions were set up through the Protection of Human Rights Act in 1993, and since then these statutory bodies have a pivotal role in protecting and upholding human rights in the country. It can investigate allegations of human right abuses and violations by security forces and government forces. It can take suo motu notice or cognizance of major crimes and human right violations against, let's say, women or minorities like scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, for example. If there is any targeted discrimination and violence against minority groups, right, including members of LGBTQIA plus community, all such complaints, all such incidents can be investigated by NHRC. Is that clear? The composition of NHRC includes a chairperson, and the chairperson who is appointed by the government will be either the Chief Justice of India, retired Chief Justice of India, or a retired judge of the Supreme Court. So this is the composition, right? A retired Chief Justice or a judge of the Supreme Court is the chairperson with 5 full-time members. At least there should be one woman of the 3 members who are appointed amongst those who have experience and practical knowledge in the field of human rights. There will be one member who has been a judge of a Supreme Court, one member who has been the Chief Justice of a High Court. That is how the 5 full-time members are appointed by the government. And there are 7 deemed members, essentially ex officio members. By virtue of holding an office or a position, they automatically become deemed members of NHRC. For example, the chairpersons of all these bodies, the National Commission for Scheduled Castes, Scheduled Tribes, the Commission for Minorities, Commission for Backward Classes. So these chairpersons automatically become deemed members. So this is the composition of NHRC. Now the problem here is that India has appointed few police officers and retired IAS officers under this category. See, government can choose 3 members who have experience in the field of public policy, human rights, etc. Government has appointed few retired police officers and IAS officers who have been involved with security issues. Now that is a conflict of interest, right? So this may not allow NHRC to remain truly independent. There are concerns that government is interfering with the functioning of NHRC, and this has been highlighted in Geneva. Few global human rights NGOs such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and few other global human rights NGOs, they wrote to the Human Rights Council and the subcommittee that provides for the accreditation status. So there have been complaints against India that India's NHRC is no longer independent. It's been alleged that government has been interfering with the functioning of NHRC. So that is the reason why India is facing a scrutiny right now at the UN Human Rights Council and the subcommittee that provides this accreditation status. Now, if you look at India's past record, the NHRC, after it was established in 1993, it received the accreditation in 1999 and it was given the A status. The A status was retained in the subsequent reviews in 2006 and 2011 under the then Manmohan Singh government. But in 2016, for the first time, NHRC's status was deferred based on concerns and allegations that human rights violations were occurring in India and NHRC was not acting independently, right? The accreditation status was deferred in 2016, but it was restored in 2017. A status had been restored in 2017 after being deferred for 1 year. But now, when India has gone for the next round of review, there have been a lot of complaints against Indian government and its alleged interference in the functioning of NHRC. So that is why the UN recognized Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. They have not yet provided the A status for NHRC. There is a likelihood that they might downgrade NHRC's accreditation to status B or B star rating, which would essentially mean India can't vote at UNHRC in Geneva and also at other bodies on human rights with regard to UN General Assembly proceedings. So right now, India is working with its partner countries. Ministry of External Affairs is working with other countries to get the support to ensure that NHRC retains its A status. Is that clear? So that is the issue which has been brought up by this article. So there is a Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. It is this body which is recognized by the UN which provides the accreditation status to NHRCs around the world. There is a subcommittee within it. So this Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, or GANHRI, right? It is this body that provides the accreditation status to NHRCs, and right now India might face a risk of losing the status. So that is what we learn from this important article. Now coming to a very important column on page number 10. This column highlights the significance of aircraft carriers in modern day warfare, and especially from India's perspective. The writer is talking about the role of aircraft carriers, which could enable India to dominate the Indo-Pacific region. So let's understand this article in slight detail. Let's understand the kind of aircraft carriers possessed by the Indian Navy. What are the future plans? What role does it play in naval diplomacy? Right? How does it help in projecting power across the Indo-Pacific? See, aircraft carriers play a critical role in warfare and also in diplomacy. In fact, aircraft carriers are often referred to as floating airfields. It's like an air base which is floating in the sea. That is where the significance, the strategic significance of an aircraft carrier lies. These massive warships, right, they can host thousands of soldiers, and more importantly, they can accommodate different types of aircrafts, from dozens of fighter jets which can be armed with latest missiles including nuclear weapons. It can even carry helicopters and other aerial assets including drones, which can be used for surveillance, maritime reconnaissance, or even for anti-submarine warfare. So an aircraft carrier provides tremendous power projection capabilities to any navy. Is that clear? If a navy desires to be a true blue water navy, if a navy truly desires to dominate international waters and project power in the blue waters far away from its coastline, then such navies need to have at least a few operational aircraft carriers. Very few countries have this capability because it's not easy to build such a massive ship, from the steel material which is used to advanced communication technology to weapons, right? It requires immense scientific effort and manufacturing effort as well to build one aircraft carrier. And they are very, very expensive. So not every country can afford an aircraft carrier. So as of now, very few countries dominate the seas through their aircraft carriers, and the most mighty navy as of now has to be the US Navy. In fact, since 1950s, it's the US Navy which has been the largest and the most dominating navy. It is built on the concept of carrier battle group. There are different battle groups under the US Navy, and each battle group is led by a massive super carrier or an aircraft carrier. So in a carrier battle group, the lead warship is the aircraft carrier, and it will be accompanied by an entire flotilla of warships. It will have missile destroyers, minesweepers, resupply ships. It will also have submarines as part of this fleet. So it's an entire fleet, a flotilla of ships led by a super-sized aircraft carrier. So the US has multiple such carrier battle groups, which allows the US to dominate almost every water body in the world. from the Pacific to the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. US Navy has the power, the ability, the resources, the logistics to dominate every sea and ocean in the world, which makes it the most powerful navy in the world. It has multiple such floating air bases. They are floating cities essentially, right? Now, after the US, there are few other powers which have few aircraft carriers like United Kingdom, France and Russia. Since many decades, these countries as well have operated aircraft carriers. UK and France have a limited aircraft carrier fleet. Russia has a decent sized aircraft carrier fleet. But today, there is one country which is challenging the might of the US Navy. It is China. The Chinese Navy, that is the PLA Navy, People's Liberation Army Navy, it has undergone a massive transformation, and PLA Navy is restructuring itself based on the aircraft carrier model. Today, China has 4 operational aircraft carriers. Is that clear? It has already deployed 3 aircraft carriers into operational duty. There is a 4th one which is coming up, and it has further plans to expand the program. There are reports that China might even build a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Essentially, an aircraft carrier which is powered by a modular nuclear reactor, small nuclear reactor, which significantly increases its operational reach and operational capabilities. So now the question is, where does India stand when it comes to its aircraft carrier capabilities? See, India has been operating aircraft carriers since 1960s. So we have a track record when it comes to operating aircraft carriers. Since 1960s, we have possessed different types of aircraft carriers. The first 2 aircraft carriers of India, they were procured from the United Kingdom. However, they were not new aircraft carriers. These were old aircraft carriers of the Royal British Navy, which was retired from service. We procured these old aircraft carriers, retrofitted them, upgraded them, and used them for few years. For example, we had INS Vikrant. I'm referring to the old INS Vikrant, not the new one, and INS Virat. In fact, in 1971, when India fought Pakistan and liberated Bangladesh, the aircraft carrier that we had played a critical role in ensuring that the Pakistan Navy was crippled and it couldn't easily provide resupplies from West Pakistan to East Pakistan. So India has actively used an aircraft carrier in combat, in actual war. Now, these 2 old aircraft carriers have been decommissioned. Right, until 1990s, they were operational, but over the years, gradually, both of them have been decommissioned. So we procured another aircraft carrier from Russia, which is INS Vikramaditya. This again was not a brand new aircraft carrier. It was again an old Russian aircraft carrier of Soviet era, of Soviet origin, called Admiral Gorshov. So we procured this old Russian aircraft carrier, upgraded this, retrofitted this at a very high price, at a very expensive price quoted by Russia, and this was deployed into service. So even today, INS Vikramaditya remains operational, and it will continue serving the Indian Navy for few more decades. But the most important Indian initiative when it comes to aircraft carriers is the indigenous aircraft carrier program. The Indian Navy, along with other concerned institutions, is working on an indigenous aircraft carrier program under the Vikrant class. And recently, the first indigenous aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant, a new INS Vikrant, was indigenously designed, built and developed in India, and it has already been deployed by the Indian Navy. It's in operational service right now. So as of now, we have 2 aircraft carriers that are operating. But usually aircraft carriers have a lot of maintenance related issues. So at any given point of time, one of them will be in service and repair, and only one of them might be functioning and operational. But at least we have 2 aircraft carriers in active service. So going forward, the Indian Navy has very ambitious plans. The Indian Navy desires to be a true blue water navy. The Indian Navy wants to have capabilities to dominate the blue waters. That is to project power beyond our territorial lines and beyond our exclusive economic zone and venture out into faraway regions away from our coastline. So navies which have such a capability, they are referred to as blue water navies. The Indian Navy wants to build this capability, and we are looking to expand the indigenous aircraft carrier program. Right now there is a proposal for a second indigenous aircraft carrier to be built under the Vikrant class. So if this is approved by the Defence Acquisition Council headed by the Defence Minister, maybe in another 10 or 15 years, India might have another indigenous aircraft carrier. So you might think that we will have 3 aircraft carriers by then. But that's an incorrect assumption, because INS Vikramaditya is already old and outdated. It might be decommissioned in another 10 or 12 years maybe. So essentially this would be a replacement for INS Vikramaditya. See, the vision of the Indian Navy is to ensure that there is a carrier battle group on the western seaboard, a carrier battle group on the eastern seaboard. This is the immediate priority for the Indian Navy. One carrier-led battle group dominating the Arabian Sea. As of now, the aircraft carrier base is in Karwar in Karnataka. You might have heard of Project Seabird, where a major Indian naval base and an air station has been built in Karwar, which serves as the operating base for India's aircraft carriers. All right. So in the western seaboard, there would be one carrier battle group led by one aircraft carrier, and similarly, we would need one to dominate the eastern seaboard as well. The long-term vision is to have at least 3 operational aircraft carriers, so that one, even if one of them is in service or in repairs, the other 2 will continue to operate. And if all 3 are operational, we can project power beyond Indian Ocean, maybe towards the Pacific as well. So as of now, the priority is to expand the program and get the approval for a second indigenous aircraft carrier under the Vikrant class. Essentially, this would be a replacement of INS Vikramaditya, which is going to be replaced in another few years. Now, in this regard, there is a very important material that was indigenously developed in India. The steel that was required, the reinforced steel, which is a crucial raw material in the building of a warship, was indigenously developed in India, which is called DMR 249 steel. There could be a prelims question on this. It's been developed by the DRDO along with the Steel Authority of India Limited and the Indian Navy. These 3 institutions together have developed the DMR 249 steel, which is a reinforced steel which is crucial in building warships. Today it has become the base raw material which is used in building our indigenous warships. All right. So India has mastered the technology, even be it the communication technology, the weapon platform needed. Right. But one thing India is still lagging behind is with regard to aircrafts which can operate from aircraft carrier. India's vision is to ensure that LCA Tejas, which has a naval variant, becomes operational in some years, so that we can have an indigenous fighter jet which can be placed on these aircraft carriers. But still, LCA Tejas has few design, developmental issues and operational issues. So we continue to rely on foreign procured fighter jets. For example, right now, it's primarily the MiG-29K from Russia, which has been stationed on both INS Vikramaditya and INS Vikrant. Is that clear? But right now India is talking to France. There is a possibility that we might get the naval variant of the Rafale. I'm sure all of you know that recently India procured the Rafale fighter jets for the Indian Air Force in a government-to-government deal. A similar deal is being negotiated with France for the naval variant of Rafale, which can be stationed on these aircraft carriers. But in the long run, India would like to develop the LCA Tejas, the naval variant, which should be deployed on these aircraft carriers. Plus, we have advanced helicopters stationed on some of these aircraft carriers, such as the Kamov aircraft or helicopter of Russian origin, which is very useful in maritime surveillance, intelligence gathering, and also in anti-submarine warfare. Recently, we have signed a deal with US for the MH-60 Romeo helicopters, which is also known for its anti-submarine warfare capabilities and intelligence gathering capabilities. Right now, the biggest threat for India in the Indian Ocean is the presence of Chinese submarines. So these helicopters, which are specially equipped with submarine hunting capabilities, will be a huge asset. And if they are stationed on these floating air bases, that would project India's naval power all across the Indian Ocean, maybe even towards the Pacific. So essentially, these aircraft carriers are not just a symbol of power. It's a tool for power projection. In fact, there is a term associated with aircraft carrier-based diplomacy. It's called gunboat diplomacy. It was the US which pioneered this concept of foreign policy. It would essentially threaten other countries, force them to protect American interests or abide by American directives by projecting its naval power all across the world, primarily through these carrier battle groups led by aircraft carriers. So this hard power-based foreign policy of US, which is driven by deterrence and threats through its naval power, through the aircraft carriers which lead the carrier battle groups, it's often referred to as the gunboat diplomacy of US. So if India would like to dominate the Indian Ocean and counter the rising Chinese threat across the Indo-Pacific, India also should have at least 2 operational aircraft carriers with the required assets, and ideally there should be at least 3 aircraft carriers in the future. But as of now, we have 2. Vikramaditya will be decommissioned in a few years, so we need a replacement. That is why the second indigenous aircraft carrier is being built. But the third one is yet to get the approval, and if that is done and if it is built eventually, let's say 20 years down the line, India might have 3 functional aircraft carriers. So understanding the role and significance of aircraft carriers, not just in warfare but also in diplomacy, is very important. So this completes my discussion of all the big articles. Now let's quickly head towards the prelim section. On page number 3, we have this article related to art and culture. It's a reference to one of India's most famous and celebrated artists with regard to modern art and modern paintings, that is Raja Ravi Varma. The article here is referring to this important painting which is titled Indulekha. See, Indulekha was a fictional character, the main protagonist in the first modern novel in Kerala literature, in Malayalam literature essentially, that was published in 1889. So this protagonist of the novel, the female lead, is depicted in this oil painting that you see here. Right? You might have seen similar paintings, which is about the artwork of Raja Ravi Varma. So this painting of a lady, right, called Indulekha, which essentially is the female lead of this fictional book, it is believed to be based on the reclining lady painting by Raja Ravi Varma. All right, it was discovered few years ago, restored and upgraded and brought into public domain. So who was Raja Ravi Varma? What has been the contribution of Raja Ravi Varma to India's art and culture? See, Raja Ravi Varma lived during this period, 1848 to 1906, born in the princely state of Travancore. All right, born in Travancore, and he went on to study oil painting. He would become a pioneer of modern art in India, and eventually he would become known as the father of modern Indian art. He trained under leading painters, including few British artists during the colonial period, and he would develop expertise both in portrait and landscape painting. But especially his work in painting portraits is what is very, very popular. You might have seen these paintings. The painting of Damayanti talking to a swan, It's one of the most legendary paintings in modern India. This was by Raja Ravi Varma, right? You might have seen this painting as well, which is the reclining lady, which is seen as an inspiration for Indulekha. So there are other popular paintings by Raja Ravi Varma, including Matsya Gandha, Shantanud Matsya Gandha, lady adorning her hair, Nayar lady, depicting the Nayar community in Kerala. Right? These have been some of the most popular artworks of Raja Ravi Varma. One of the most celebrated artists in modern times, considered as the father of modern Indian art and paintings, and he specialized in oil paint colors, not in watercolors. These are some basic details that you need to know. Next, on page number 4, there's an article referring to village defense guards in Jammu and Kashmir. And according to the article, a village defense guard has been killed in a gunfight with militants. So you should understand who are these village defense guards or VDGs. See, the VDGs, they were recently established in 2022 by the Ministry of Home Affairs. It is based on the Village Defense Committees or VDCs that was previously established in 1990s for the purposes of self-defense against Pakistan-sponsored militants in Jammu and Kashmir. When J&K militancy was at its peak, innocent civilians, especially in the border villages, they would be targeted by these militants and terrorists. So to protect the local community, what India did was, India decided to arm the local villagers. Is that clear? Village defense committees were set up and Indian forces would supply weapons to civilians. Some of them would be given the rank of special police officer as well, and they would be placed under the overall supervision of the local district police. So essentially, these would be self-defense committees, because in remote border areas, right, these people can't wait for the security forces to arrive when there is a terrorist attack or a militant attack to save them. So if the local people are trained in operating guns and if weapons are given to them, they can use them for self-defense. That was the idea behind the establishment of village defense committees in Jammu and Kashmir. So throughout 1990s, this practice continued. Members of the village defense committees would be trained by Indian security forces like CRPF, Indian Army, BSF, etc. Weapons would be provided to them. They would be under the supervision of the local police, and there would be an incentive. There would be a small stipend provided as well to encourage local civilians to take part in these village defense committees. Now, this practice was highly effective. It became a tool of empowerment for the border villages, where they could defend themselves against these terrorist attacks. But however, the practice became very controversial. Because essentially, when the state is arming the civilians, it's as good as raising a private army or a private militia. So when that happens, you never know whether these members might misuse the power. They might misuse the weapons to commit human right abuses, to commit human right violations. So many such incidents came up in 1990s and early 2000. So that is why this practice had been stopped. Village defense committees had been disbanded. But recently, there has been an increase in militant attacks against civilian population in J&K, especially minority civilians from other minority religious groups, and migrant workers in J&K have been targeted by Pakistan-sponsored terrorists. So the Home Ministry decided to revive this old program, and it has renamed village defense committees as village defense guards. So local civilians are again being armed by the government. Security forces like BSF, CRPF and J&K police, they are supplying arms and weapons to local civilians, giving them training as well on how to operate the weapons, and they are playing a role in countering terrorism in Kashmir. They can't proactively engage the terrorists. They can't hunt down terrorists. They don't have the mandate to do that. This is only for self-defense. Only when terrorists attack civilians and villagers, only then these VDGs can open fire to protect the community, and it should be an act of self-defense. But if such powers are given, right? And if there are no checks and balances, there is a possibility that it could be misused, possibly leading to human right violations and abuses. So in the latest development reported here, in an ongoing counter-terrorist operation, a village defense guard who was assisting the security forces has been shot by the militants, and unfortunately, the village defense guard has lost his life. So you should understand the relevance of this initiative. How does it help in counter-terrorism? What is the relevance of establishing such self-defense units among civilian population in a conflict-hit area? What are the consequences? What could be the negative consequences of such practices? That is something you should be familiar with. Next, on page 15, there's an article referring to the Senkaku Diaoyu island dispute between China and Japan. The Senkaku Diaoyu island, it's a disputed island. I'll show you the map, I'll show you where it is located. But please understand that a few Japanese leaders and politicians, they decided to inspect the disputed island. This island, it is located in East China Sea. I want you to look at the map. This is the East China Sea, all right, and this is where the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands are located. It's a small group of islands. It's called Senkaku in Japanese. It's called Diaoyu in Mandarin, in Chinese. So China refers to it as Diaoyu Islands, claims sovereignty over it. Japan calls it Senkaku in Japanese and claims sovereignty over these islands based on historical claims. So here China has been violating UN clause provisions. It's in violation of international law. It has disrupted freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight, which is a basic right guaranteed under international law. So Chinese Navy and Air Force, they have intercepted Japanese vessels and aircraft and prevented them from moving around in the region. So tensions have increased between the two. There are heightened tensions between China and Japan over the sovereignty claims over these islands. So recently, Japanese ministers, politicians and leaders, they visited the island, and China has objected to this and it has protested against it. The Chinese Coast Guard has intercepted these Japanese leaders who were visiting, and it has led to a major face-off between the Chinese authorities and the Japanese authorities. It's very similar to how China protests against the visit of Indian leaders to Arunachal Pradesh. Recently, PM Modi visited Arunachal Pradesh and Tawang. So China raised a big issue about it, even though Arunachal Pradesh is integral to India, right? Clearly, it's part of India's sovereignty. But still, China, which claims Arunachal as South Tibet, it objects to any visit by Indian leaders and officials to Arunachal Pradesh. So you can see that China does the same with Japan as well. It again shows China's aggressive expansionist behavior, how it violates international law and threatens the sovereignty of other countries. Coming to the last article for today, on the same page, there's a country called Togo, which has been mentioned. This country is headed towards elections. The article itself is not important, but the country of Togo could be important. So you should know where it is located, what is unique about this country, why is it relevant for India. So let me point this out. Togo is a West African country. It's located in West Africa over here. A very small country. It faces the Gulf of Guinea, which is a crucial water body blessed with resources. So it has access to the Atlantic. It has important seaports located here, right? And it is surrounded by Ghana, Benin over here, and Burkina Faso to the north. These are the neighbors of Togo. It is such a small country. This is the country of Togo, all right? Its capital is Lome over here, faces the Atlantic Ocean in the Gulf of Guinea, and it is bordered by Ghana, Benin, and Burkina Faso. Now, what is special about this country? See, India has a special relationship with this West African country. We have invested in some projects here, a solar power project under International Solar Alliance. Under the International Solar Alliance has been funded by India. The NTPC, National Thermal Power Corporation, has been involved, and we are building a solar plant in this African country. We don't have a high commission over here, but there is a consular office in Lome. The Indian High Commission in Ghana, in the neighboring country of Ghana, it acts as the High Commission for Togo as well. There are few hundred Indians working and residing here, few businessmen from India, right? They do reside here in this country. But what really stands out in our relationship is the resources present in this country. There is a critical resource found in Togo, which is phosphate reserves. It has one of the most extensive phosphate reserves in the world. It's one of the world's largest phosphate producer. Now, can you tell me what is the application of phosphate? Why is it used? Why is it critical for India? India is one of the biggest purchasers or biggest buyers of phosphate from Togo. And thankfully, it has access to sea. It has direct access to Gulf of Guinea, right? So from here, India procures phosphate, which is crucial for certain applications and certain processes. So please let me know in the comments, why is phosphate important? Why is it critical? It also has other commodities, especially coffee and cocoa, right? In West Africa, there are few cocoa and rubber producing nations, and Togo is one of them. It's a sub-Saharan nation. Plus, India has given line of credit. We have given concessional loans to this country as well. And we've also expanded the Pan-African E-Network project. This was an initiative of Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. When Abdul Kalam was the president, he was visiting Africa as the president of India, and he realized that African countries are suffering from lack of access to good education and good healthcare. So then President Abdul Kalam suggested that India should make use of ISRO's satellites and the basic communication networks that we have and provide for telemedicine and teleeducation to African countries. This idea was taken seriously by the Ministry of External Affairs, and India implemented the Pan-African E-Network project. Under the then Manmohan Singh government, Pan-African E-Network project was rolled out across African countries. So through ISRO satellites and through VSAT terminals that India has installed across Africa, we have even laid OFC cables to provide the communication needed. So today, many African countries have access to Indian universities and colleges. They get access to teleeducation. They have access to telemedicine. African patients can consult with Indian doctors. So this service has been provided by India to multiple African countries, and Togo is one of the beneficiaries. The reason why I'm explaining all this is because these are the Indian investments and initiatives to keep Togo on India's side. It is very crucial because we need phosphate, which is very crucial. So please find out why phosphate is important. Mention that in the comment section below. So this completes my discussion for today. So these are the two practice questions based on what we have studied. Please use them for your answer writing practice. Write the answer and post them in the comment section below. I hope you guys have understood everything that we have discussed, and I hope you have liked the session as well. If you did, please let me know in the comments, press the like button, and I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.